feel like we should do like a podcast cold open type thing where we're like already talking about something, but I don't really have anything.
No, no. We're used to talking asynchronously on Slack, so I can just like come up with words on the moment. I need time to prepare that zinger. That's the way I
Oh
operate.
yeah. No, no, it's usually going the opposite. I need time to not come up with anything.
Nice, nice. Well, maybe I won't say that. Maybe I'm gonna not say that.
But yeah, I actually I'm gonna assume that it's time. So hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to the inaugural live stream of Updating Standard RB. So my name is Camilo Payan. I am a senior software consultant. Yeah, that's right. At Testable, where we're working to make the way the world builds software better, especially with Ruby tools like this one. And let me introduce my other half today, which is Josh Justice. He's a staff software consultant at Testable. He's worked in software development since 2004, all over in backend, front-end, web, and native mobile. Ruby and Rails are his favorite backend technologies, so that makes him a perfect person to talk about this today. And he also speaks and writes about testing. He even has a live stream that he does sometimes, so he can help me troubleshoot in case this goes wrong.
Hey, let's dig in.
I was wondering, have you used standard Ruby before?
Yeah, so my story about standard, and it is going to sound like I'm shilling, but this is totally true. I work in JavaScript a lot, and I love ESLint and Prettier for formatting, standardization, save, and auto-formats the file and save. Very fast and efficient. In Ruby, up until recently, it wasn't after I started at TestDouble recently that I started using standard. I've been trying to use Rubicop defaults, and the editor integration was slow. And I forget exactly what it disrupted in my workflow, but I think it was when I was running RSpec tests through a command line option, I would save, switch over to my terminal, run the test, but the test would start before the file had actually saved because it took a couple seconds.
Right.
So that was throwing off, giving me false positives, false negatives. But as soon as I tried standard for the first time, it's extremely quick, and so there's much more the flow that I'm used to from JavaScript and that folks are used to in other languages these days. Formats quickly, checks quickly, saves the file, and you're good to go. So I switched all my side projects to standard and never looked back.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good intro into like what standard is too. So standard is a rule set for the Ruby linter Rubocop, like you were talking about. So it has those defaults. I think usually by default everything is enabled in Rubocop. So Rubocop is the actual linter, but what standard is a rule set for that linter, and its main purpose is to help things be a little more efficient and to especially to prevent what's called bike shedding. So for everybody, if you haven't heard the term bike shedding, it's the idea that when people, especially smart people, are presented with a large, complicated project, as we often are, they're naturally going to gravitate toward fighting over trivial things instead of actually keeping an eye on the big picture. So in the original story, they're trying to build a nuclear energy plant, but instead everybody's talking about the color of a bike shed. Oftentimes in code projects, instead of really getting down to the implementation details of a large code project, we're fighting over things like line length and tabs versus spaces, which there's a right answer to that, so it's tabs, folks. But but in standard, we choose those Rubocop rules, and they're conservative. We try and keep a deliberate pace, so we are doing these updates every month, and hopefully these rules will make sense to you and run quickly. And if they don't make sense to you, you can always override it anyway, so it's not like we're really going to get in the way of anything. So let me switch over to the browser. You can find us on GitHub. But I wanted to let you all know about some standard features that were recently shipped by Mr. Justin Searles, one of the founders of TestDouble. Which one of those is a Visual Studio Code extension. I don't use Visual Studio Code, but this is pretty exciting because it also required a lot of work in the language server protocol support for standard, so that'll be used for pretty much everybody. But if you use VS Code, there's an extension. You can find out more about it on the Testable blog. And another thing is, by default, standard gives you rules for two Rubocop things: the default Rubocop project and Rubocop performance, which is a set of rules to hopefully make your code faster through different, like standardizing on different syntax that ends up with faster Ruby. So what this does is we are now able to, or you are now able as the end user, to add different extensions. So the big one that people have always wanted to use is RuboCop Rails, which is RuboCop rules that are specifically for Rails. Now that is something that you can add on to standard and run alongside it in a little easier method. And you can, again, read about that on this blog post, or it's in the documentation on GitHub in standard. But today, we are going to be updating standard and coming up with some new RuboCop rules, deciding what's going to come in, what's going to come out, because there are some upgrades that are happening. RuboCop up to 148.1 and RuboCop Performance up to 116.0. So we can switch over to the editor, I think. The way that standard works is we have this base config file. Everything is it's a regular RuboCop config file. This is why you can override everything. And what Josh and I are going to do is go through the 4 rules that were added to RuboCop since the last time we updated standard, and decide, are they in, are they out? Do we all move on with our life? So the first one here is metrics collection literal length. So what does this do? And there are a couple things that we try and work on, like is why was this made? What does it do, of course, and how we feel about it. Is this going to be useful to people? Is it going to get in the way of developers? And yeah, generally this one, let's see what it does by looking at the pull request, of course. This cop checks for extremely long array and hash literals and set pseudoliterals. Okay. And it does that because it's indicative of configuration or data that may be extracted somewhere else, like a database. This, I don't know, what do you think, Josh? What do you think of the reasoning for this? I guess, first of all, does this seem useful to you?
It's convicting because I see my mind immediately going in the direction of bike fitting you just said. But that's the point, right? Like, we are assessing these like small, tiny things right now and decide, and maybe people can move on. But it's like I find that I have opinions on all these things. Sometimes waffling opinions, though, so maybe I'm good for this. Yeah, like the idea of, oh, this would be better in a config file is interesting. I think it makes sense. I mean, I think about I certainly work in applications where things. When I'm tempted to do this, I tend to more frequently put things. It's things that should be in a JSON file or some other kind of configuration file. I don't find myself moving between this and the database too often. I mean, that's fine that it's listed here as an example of the kind of thing. Maybe this long literal, this collection literal would belong in a database. But as I think about this, I'm going to come in because you're more used to than me with standards heuristics, how you all decide what to put in, and whether you err on the side of putting it in, putting it out. So I'll let you weigh in on that. But my thought initially is I do see value in this. If it's, and I'm curious how. Yeah. Can you scroll down? What is the default for the number of entries that are allowed or disallowed? I think I saw that a little bit.
Yeah, that was 250 entries.
250 entries, yeah. So that's a lot. Something that I could think, actually on my consulting project right now, we have some visual theme configuration, and an argument that I'm making about it as we assess, are we going to share this? Are we going to copy and paste it? Can someone maintain it? Is just configuration. Like, it's literally just the values for all these material design things and configurations, and it's not logic, it's not React components, it's not model classes or anything like that, it's just configuration. I think it might live in a JavaScript file. It might need to. I might be cheating with my language a little bit, and there might be a tiny bit of a function in there somewhere. But effectively, you're configuring the theme. And so, like, for me to say that to someone, to make an argument, oh, we should treat this file this way because of that, is valuable. And so I think it is valuable to have this rule to be able to say, like, oh, that probably belongs in a config file, and it could lead to a good separation of concerns where you have a bunch of configurations for a bunch of things, and maybe you do have a function or a method or two of logic. Maybe those should live separately. And when it gets to 250 entries, like, imagine if you had 500 entries in a list, And item 251 has logic in it. You're doing some Ruby logic to calculate something. Well, I thought it was all configuration. I thought it was all hard coded data. And so
Hmm.
when something is, well, YAML's maybe a bad example because YAML can do logic too. But
Oh gosh.
so this is a JSON file. This is a plain text file. There's not going to be logic in it.
Right.
It's nice from a separation of concerns standpoint. So I could see an argument for putting this in. But what is your thought?
Hmm. You know what's interesting is I've been on the editor view, so folks. Now we're on the browser, but yeah, the thing that gives me pause here is that on the one hand, 100%, I totally get this cop, and hopefully that people people watching this will know that it exists now, so that's great. On the flip side, this kind of metric especially is the kind of thing that we wouldn't normally put into something like standard, and it's kind of I mean, if you look at all the other ones that are in the metrics namespace, it's exactly the kind of thing that if you have a problem in your code base, this is going to be a great tool to get rid of it and call out all of the places where this happens. Like you said, I mean, this threshold is quite high. 250 things in an array or in a set that's just sitting in a Ruby file is obviously kind of a problem, and would serve better in a config file of some kind, especially. But on the flip side, it's a decision that you all should be making once you have a problem and you need to scale it back. One thing that Rubocop does is it'll generate a to-do file. So once it finds something, you can generate a to-do file. You can run it maybe even just with just this one rule on it. Run Rubocop, have that to-do file, and then be able to take those apart later. But as like something that's going to run in CI, something that's going to run locally, I'm not sure that this is going to get you much of a signal.
Let me ask you a question about that, actually. I am filling the role of an uninformed viewer because I am uninformed here. So this is a genuine question. You've mentioned the fact that you can override and configure the rules the way you want. I thought part of the, at least the marketing standpoint of standard, is that you can't. Like, don't make a decision. Like, you can't configure it, you can't tweak it. You are using standard the way standard is meant to be used, and that the value add is that you are kind of like prettier in JS. Like, you are taken, the controls are taken away from you. So
Mm-hmm.
tell me, maybe we're bringing out the level 2 or the exceptions that can come in, but help me understand, like, how can have I misunderstood the configurability of standard? Or is it like a secret? Like, try to not do that.
In this case, that's a good question. Let me think about it for a little bit. Prettier wouldn't do this either. You know what I mean?
Right. Oh, yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
insofar as we're mostly checking for errors, and we're mostly, like the lint that happens here, and we're checking, especially in Rubocop, for style, that would be like the main kind of thing that we bring in, because we want people to use the most up-to-date Ruby syntax. We want people to, well, we don't want to get in the way of developers, so we're not actually try not to be as opinionated as like prettier is. Very opinionated. I don't know. We are spreading our opinions. That's like a weird phrasing. But prettier will just go ahead and like change all your code right then and there, and that's also what standard does. But we do want people to be able to write code the way that they want to. It's not quite the same as like GoFMT would be a further example of a tool that takes your code and then just turns it into its code. In this case, this just seems a little bit outside of that purview either way, in that it's more of a heuristic for your. So that's why I was bringing up like kind of other things that you could do
Mm.
as the user, because this is actually all of these I think are pretty neat. This is probably the most interesting one. Some of these I find usually pretty obnoxious when they're used, like class length and block length, because when those things come up, like an extremely long class, I feel like there's actually sometimes a completely different non-code problem, but also usually it's like inherited code. So I'm not sure if I want to get that in my linter every time. Um,
That brings me to the other thing that I was going to say about metrics is these are the ones that were the most painful for me using RuboCop standard rules, and maybe a lot of folks listening and watching feel the same way. Now, I'm actually someone I've the idea. One of the things I love about Ruby is the focus on separation of concerns, and let's have focused classes and focused methods.
It's not better.
And so
I use my
I love
trackpad
the
all the
prompt
time.
and being kind of across different
But
programming
that makes
languages.
it
I love to
better.
be reminded, hey, it would be great to keep your functions short. It would be great to keep your methods short, your classes short. At the same time, when I'm writing code, and I'm writing side project code, and so it's not necessarily the most, you know, focused on like precision of professional, layout of my Ruby code. This will pop up, and I get into like, oh well, in my RSpec tests, like those files are a little bit long, those blocks in there are a little bit long, and it's like, well, that's kind of how I'm arranging my tests. Like, could I do it differently? Could I
Mhm.
really factor out my
Yeah.
side project code? Yes. Is it gonna hurt me? Like, it's CRUD apps, it's CRUD Rails APIs that I'm working on the side. It's all JSON APIs on the side, and those things have never caused any pain. And so I end up going through. Back when I was using Rubicop, going through project by project. Let me just turn off the metrics one by one as they come up. And
Hmm.
once or twice, I was like, oh yeah, let me try to refactor this out, and it can be a good pressure, right? But kind of another thing that comes to mind is, as you were saying, the amount of like, what's the value to choose? Is it 250? Is it 100? These are all things where
Yeah,
there's not
exactly.
a great number to choose, but like this is the number you should set your classes or your methods or your collection literals to. And so the needs may vary depending on your domain and your inherited code and things like that. And so the idea, even if we were like, hey, it would be nice to put these metrics in standard, it's just really hard to pick the value. And so those are all reasons that it feels good to me to keep this in.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the reason that I liked 250 as a number, just because it's so high. you know, a hash with 250 elements is clearly something else. But yeah, in this case, I'm gonna say we'll keep this one out. But yeah, I hope people know that this is something that Rubocop can do,
Yeah.
because it's still going to be useful info.
I, I thought he was auditioning
And
people
the
for the
neat bit
researcher
is
job.
everything is false by default. So
Yeah.
in the case of this one test that we have, so no changes needed there.
Oh,
I don't
fix
think
those for
that.
you.
Let me see. Is there anything else that needs to be configured for this? No. Okay. Cool.
This is gonna be
So
interesting.
the next cop that is up is going to be style/dir empty. So let's kind of run through that again. Let me change back to
Yeah.
the browser. And here's the pull request. So this was contributed by YDAH. And it fixes an issue. So let's take a look at that. Ruby 2.4 added dir.empty to address code like dir.entries.size equals 2, which I guess is, yeah, for dot and dot dot. Okay. So this is the kind of thing that I guess sometimes we'll add it into standard,
Yeah.
where
What
since it's a new
happened?
Ruby feature, newish, 2.4 is, I think, past end of life, I think, at this point. But that notwithstanding, it's a method that will hopefully take your code from this, which I'll agree looks pretty ugly, to just directory.empty. I can understand the idea behind it. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, let me. I've been reminded of my lack of knowledge of the standard rationale, so let me tell you my assessment of this rule, and then we can hear where it fits in the standards approach. And again, that perspective of working in JavaScript, working in Ruby, this seems to be getting at there's more than one way to do it in Cody,
Right.
which I know Perl, I think, is talked about in the Ruby world as well, and really just the idea that it's not a negative thing in class APIs to like, oh, you can get the length or the size, and you can compare that to zero. Like, you already have all the information you need. Why would we add another method to the class? In Ruby in general, and APIs is designed in kind of a Ruby community way, it's like, oh, but commonly you're checking if it's empty. And so why don't we add a helper method
It's
that
only
shows that,
four
and it
letters.
really adds to the readability. That's one of the things that I love about Ruby code. And so, for it, this would be of value to me, being in and out of Ruby sometimes, not always doing it professionally, kind of in and
The,
out, to learn about new features. You talked about that, the
it was
value of
that or
informing people about new
fireproof,
features when they
or
might be
I
aware
don't remember
of.
the other
Um,
option. But
and in cases where, yeah, we can detect you are checking whether it's zero, whether it's not zero. Like you could use this built-in method. Like that's the style of code in Ruby I prefer to write. I prefer to take advantage of methods like that. I prefer to add that readability. And any programming language I'm in, I mean, we
Yeah.
were just talking on my client team today about in our JavaScript React code about the focus on refactoring, the focus on reviewing and PRs, and is this the best way to communicate this?
you can add
Because we
custom
want this
words.
code to be
Hmm.
maintainable. In this client in particular, it's a large nonprofit, and the code lives on for a long, long time, probably
Yeah.
more than a lot of React code bases. So that it's a different situation. But in this one, I think that readability, that maintainability, really helps for this client. So I think there's a value of this method existing, and letting developers know. But is that the role of standard? So I put that question to you.
Yeah, I think the
Standard.
one of the main things that comes out of this one, especially is like this style of code, just jumps out to me as, I mean, two, zero, zero makes sense to me. The size being zero, but why is the size equals two? Like because of a misspent youth on Linux servers, I know that it's because of the dot and dot dot that would show up, but
Oh, I didn't know. I was wondering.
if that, yeah, exactly, if that doesn't come to mind, it not only does it not make sense, it's a magic number, and that just seems like, why not three? Why isn't it zero in this case? But then you have to know that this is going to happen with entries. So
What?
I'm thinking that, yeah, this should go in. This is something that standard could take off your hands, and yeah, this is just a lot more understandable. I want to know if the directory is empty. I don't want to know if there's two entries in the directory or anything like that.
Do you well? And I think just to share a thought on the software here, what that gets to is you're communicating at the right level of abstraction. Like you're not
Right.
making the reader think about these unrelated details and know about the history of Linux and Unix directory listings.
Yeah.
But what is it that your business logic cares about? It cares whether it's empty or not, and really for the language and the API and the linter to steer and to, provide options and steer developers towards doing that is a big help. Now, are there other any other rules that are in standard that are included in standard you could think of off the top of your head that operate in a similar way? Is this something that comes off a lot in standard?
Yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head,
Okay,
which is
so
kind of a downer. But I know I know I've seen it.
Cool. I believe you.
Oh man, especially ones that have a required Ruby version. So if we're both in agreement, then yeah, we'll totally uh, add this in a second. Let me see if I can just find actually, yeah, here's a similar one that I'm pretty sure is enabled, where it's file.size when the file. No, this isn't enabled. I know this because we're literally going to talk about it in like 5 minutes.
Nice.
Um, oh right, yeah, frozen string literal comments. Those are all over your Ruby files. It turns out you don't really need them.
it's your turn, Justin.
So yeah,
Cool. I feel good about this one.
Two, three
yeah. Let me
letters.
go ahead. So let me switch over to the editor. I'm gonna try and come up with keyboard shortcuts for this at some point. And yeah, we can go ahead and enable that. The other thing to recognize is that I think it was from Ruby 2.4 is what it said. Let me double check that. Yeah, so it has to be Ruby 2.4, which means we should go back to our config for 2.3. And make sure that that is disabled before it causes problems for everybody. We don't, I mean, we match Ruby's support, so we don't support 2.3, but we do have those configs in case you're that far back,
Yep.
which hopefully,
How could you tell?
good luck. So the next one up is going to be style file empty. So the same contributor, YDAH, thank you for that. And similarly, required from Ruby 2.4. So the idea here is for any of these things here, file.0, path to file, file.size. Oh, let me go ahead and make sure that we're looking at the browser. Yeah, all right. So file.0, file.size equals 0, file.size.0. So my most of my career was background in PHP, so I'm always a little amused by the question mark methods.
Yeah.
0, empty. Anyways, that happens. And replacing all of these options with file.empty is
Do you happen to know what the file test class is? Like what that's for?
no, that is interesting. It's the first time seeing that. Ruby file test.
Let's read a line or two of the documentation before we make the decision for standards for everyone.
File test operations similar to those used in file stat. Okay.
Gotcha. So in a sense, this is a higher level of abstraction where rather than interacting with the file yourself and testing something, this provides a bunch of
What
tests
did you have?
available.
Yeah.
And yet even with this, there's they added the additional level where instead of file testing the size, you file test is it empty? Is that I forget what it was that the linter rule was sending us towards, but
Yeah, there was I think an empty check in that. Yeah, it was file test on it. Oh no, actually it's saying that's good. File test.0 is the one it says is bad.
gotcha.
I wonder what the difference is. I guess we could just find out.
I guess it is size. It's interesting. I wonder if the linter rule catches file test size and comparing that to 0.
Yeah. Oh wait, file test size doesn't actually appear to be on here. Because, yeah, I'm not sure why. Maybe that's something that they can improve.
Not me.
Oh no, here it is, not size. That's a good question.
Yeah. But
Create an issue, throw it in there.
adding in more, maybe I can PR that and we can put it in next month or something.
Put up the bat signal for Rubocop.
Yeah.
File test.size. So, okay.
So I guess a big question that comes to mind for me, I mean, certainly the general gist of this is similar. It sure seems like it was added in the same Ruby version, so it sure seems likely that someone added it at the same time, as far as adding the message to Ruby itself.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine all of our rationale from before would apply here as well. I am wondering, just thinking through, or just putting it out for us, if there's anything different about the files that would change our decision. I think that would be pretty surprising in this case to have one but not the other in. But regardless, we shouldn't make it a foregone conclusion as we think through this file-related rule. I did see a safety note in there in the notes about the autocorrect.
That's what I was going to say. So there are two things that are pretty different about this one. One is that it's not safe. It's not considered safe in the first place. So what that means in Rubocop, I may have apparently scheduled a meeting during the meeting. So if you can hear my lovely wife Gladys also having her meeting. We just moved into the same office, so that's
well, the answer was
growing
Superman
pains.
and Wonder Woman.
Anyways,
The
for
guy is Superman and
for
Spider-Man.
Rubocop safety, what that means is that it's going to have false positives as a part
when
of
they get back from commercial,
Rubocop.
like the guy's wife didn't let him
So that's kind of a problem right there. And then this supports autocorrection, so it'll go ahead and change your code if you run autocorrect. It's not so Rubocop does both detection and autocorrection.
You would never mention them together.
I'm trying to remember because I was playing around with settings on this. I think this might have been when I was switching over from Rubocop to standard. Are there two different levels of autocorrect, like autocorrect and then like forced autocorrect that relates to like the safety of the changes? Does that ring a bell?
Yeah. So again, I mean, safety in general just talks about whether or not it's going to get false positives in Rubocop. So safe autocorrect and means that there isn't going to be any changes to what happened. Like there's no anticipated changes. Obviously, there are going to be bugs in Rubocop, just like in every other piece of software. But there are no anticipated changes to like the logic of your code, and also it's not going to change false positives. But in this case, it's calling out that it's considered unsafe because there are files here that aren't only Boolean. So for example, some of these file.sas, file.read, and file.binread, they raise an exception, whereas empty is a Boolean check. So if you have code that's depending on the exception coming up and catching that exception, then it's not going to work the same as it did before. So what does that make you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, putting in unsafe default seems scary. It seems like
Yeah.
that seems like a great reason to leave that out. I wonder if the question that occurs to me is anything with safety implications?
That no, a twig is on the ground. It's not on the tree still.
Hey, we will lint it, but we won't actually apply. We've configured it to not automatically apply the autocorrect, whereas it does automatically apply the autocorrect for other things. Is there any category like that in standard?
No.
Well, it doesn't. So standard like Rubocop doesn't automatically autocorrect in the first place. It will only show you what's going wrong. So you have to run standard with autocorrect to get it to do that. But between the two things that are unsafe on here, and the fact that there's like, I think it's a little strange that it's so aggressive.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different kinds of code that are going to get changed here. It can't guarantee that it's not going to get false positives, and the autocorrection is also unsafe. I'm kind of leaning toward, while this does seem like it matches the dir empty, I'm not sure if it adds so much value that it's going to be better for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and so that raises a question for me. It's really interesting this example came up because the two are so parallel on the surface.
Yeah.
And yet there's implications, and they're right there in the documentation as well, but there's implications once you look past the appearance of it, where it's like, ooh, this behaves very differently. So it's interesting. So we could say, okay, the dir empty rule is in, the file empty rule is out, and then someone who knows and is thinking a lot about Rubocop rules may be surprised about that. They're like, wow, why is there one and not the other? That's very strange. Even maybe like I tend to not always think very precisely as I'm going through. It's like, why am I getting the empty check some places and not other places? Oh, well, in one place it's a directory and in other places it's a file. And yet this feels like something where, from the standpoint of we're looking at the rules, it feels parallel. It feels like it would be weird or inconsistent not to have them in. And yet, from the standpoint of the user of standard, like when I'm using standard, it's like, hey, just give me the rules that are helpful and useful and safe. And so I'm thinking that there's not really any. I mean, the question I was considering is this a reason to keep the dir empty rule out as well? But thinking through it, it doesn't seem like the benefit you get from the dir empty rule being in seems better than the very low chance of a little bit of confusion around why one rule is in and the other is not. So I'm feeling like dir is in, file is out.
Yeah, that's the way I'm leaning. And it's interesting that you bring it up because even though the two are so similar and they were even added in by the same person at about the same time, so clearly they consider them to be related rules. At the end of the day, they do different things and to different degrees. So we take them one by one. File empty, I'm thinking, is out. So let's go over to that one. And also, it's already disabled because that's how the little code gen works. But we don't have to have a special rule in 2.3. So.
Great. Now I'm curious. Well, maybe I'm jumping ahead. Do you all record rationale for these decisions in the PR that's adding this into standard, or I guess we're literally recording it now on the video? But other than that, like, do you share out? Oh, we put this in because of this. We took this out because of that.
What we do is we keep like I'm going to be recording this right now, like our rationale. I mean, like in a little document. We do keep a running spreadsheet of like yes, no, and oh right. One day we'll have the little GIF of what was it, Commodus from
yes, Gladiator.
From Gladiator, right? Down. But
Great timely reference on my birthday.
But yeah, just a couple of sentences about like how to do it. But it could also fit into the changelog,
There you go.
or into the PR that updates it. So that'll be something we could I'll type that into there a little later. Oh, but that's going to get in the way of releasing it on stream.
Mm. Yeah, it's a task for the next release. Get the plan ready exactly to do things.
All right. Let me make sure I'm on the right screen. I'm on the editor. I want to be on the browser. So here is the last rule we're going to be considering. Let me go ahead and take a look at this. Style redundant here doc limiter quotes. So if you haven't used here docs in Ruby, what it is you can have multi-line strings by using what's called a here doc. So we can. It's one of those things that when you see it, you learn about it, and before that, you will probably never use it. But eventually, one day, you're going to need a multi-line string like that. So the way you do that is with the little two little greater than signs. I can't tell with this font if that's a hyphen or a tilde.
I usually take my
Thing you about tilde, and then it ends. You give it a delimiter, which can be whatever you want, and it ends with the same delimiter at the end of the string after all this. So this was one that I actually got a little code snippet to show you from Mr. Searles, who sent it to me in Slack, so I'm going to have to open that up. But it was kind of an interesting thing that I think will whatchamacallit. Sorry, the danger of opening Slack is reading Slack. So
Yeah, no.
yeah, so let's just talk a little bit about what this cop does, and then I'll show you that particular curiosity. Apparently, this was based on an issue. That unfortunately didn't really add a whole lot of context. So that's the programming life. You try and follow up on something, follow a link, and nada. So this cop checks for redundant here doc delimiter quotes. Do something, and here the delimiter is in single quotes. No string interpolation style text. And the good version is without those single quotes.
I think, yeah, maybe in the published docs there was, yeah, here we go. I think after you talking through that and reading through that, I think I follow now. So can I take a shot at what I think this maybe means, and you can let me know? Okay. So bad. Yeah, I'm gonna stumble through phrasing this as well. I can't see. I don't have that window in front of me, so if you're tabbing, I can't see. Okay. Yeah. So good is when you have just plain text in the multi-line string. This rule allows you just use the delimiter like EOS directly as it is. And then we're saying, hang on a second here. So now when we put, it's saying when you put single quotes around it, then it doesn't interpolate that town. It's treating that just as it is instead of treating it as string interpolation. Did you have that code snippet you were looking at in Slack? We're not automatically have a string.
So this was kind of news to me, and let's go over to my terminal.
Yeah.
Okay, and let me go back and forth a little bit. So, and if we go ahead and put that, and use some string interpolation, no string interpolation happens in this case. But if we had, I mean, look, even IRB is already highlighting it differently. So string interpolation does happen when we don't have the single quotes around the delimiter to start out. Apparently it's not required for the ending delimiter. And then the string interpolation doesn't happen when we do have the single quotes around our delimiter, which is, I don't know, it's just what? How did we get here? I'm not really sure. I would love to find out what just
Yeah. Yeah, I think I have. I think I can. Now that you've shown me this example, I think I can conceptualize it. I think maybe a way to say it, or at least I describe it to myself, is you by default here docs do string interpolation. Like they support that, so that's the default.
yeah.
The accept, and that's the simpler syntax, which is what I've always seen. So there's a if you want a different behavior, you can opt into it. You opt into it by using the single quote characters around the here doc delimiter. And what
Hmm.
that does is it turns off interpolation. This multi-line string is just shown exactly as typed. And I think that if unless I'm totally remembering wrong and people are going to be embarrassed at my lack of Ruby chops, that's how single quote strings work in Ruby as well. Single quote strings are literal. Double quote strings
Right.
in Ruby allow interpolation. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think the way I interpret the rule then is, hey, we should use the simpler default way of designating the delimiters by default, and only allow the single quotes when you're using it. So only for a string where there is interpolation marker, the pound curlies. So because if that's not used at all, if interpolation is not used at all, they are equivalent. They work just the same, and so therefore let's go to the simpler one, the more common one, and then like I mean I know your experience as well. Like I've never run across the single quotes, and so if I saw those, I could be confused about what's happening, and I could be tripped up in the future. It could be a foot gun where I add some interpolation, and then I don't know why it's working because those single quotes were ran from the start. So I don't know if my rambling fully captured it, but the rationale for why to go with a more common approach to here docs makes sense to me, and I definitely feel like there's value there.
So what you're saying is kind of have it enabled so then most of the time, and let me make sure that we're looking at the browser, most of the time we have this version without the single quotes. I don't know. This whole thing is actually a little confusing to me.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, it is for me too. Kind of. Sorry, I cut you off.
no, 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 no. Go for it.
Yeah, so I think thinking like, what will be the impact of this being? And so I'm trying to think of. There's so many cases here. I'm trying to think of multiple cases. The impact would be, what does it disallow? It disallows the unnecessary edge case. It disallows you added in single quotes, which we've barely ever seen, and there's not actually even a reason to. And so it avoids doing this surprising thing that could trip somebody up in the future. It's like, hey, save that from when it's actually needed, when it'll actually make a difference in interpolation. And in fact, you could say it this way: if you have a string that's not using interpolation, you might not know. You might just accidentally put in single quotes because you think it's a string there, and you don't know that in the future it's going to change the behavior. Whereas this way, it's like it's only going to allow the single quotes in when you do like, hey, oh yeah, I see you're using it. I see that you will see the result right away because you just wrote this code. You will, assuming that standard is already in the first place, you just wrote this code. You'll see the difference. You'll see that the interpolation is not happening, and then you decide, oops, that's not what I wanted, and then you change it at that time. So it's like it's avoiding laying a future landmine that could blow up for someone when they least expect it. I'm not trying to hard convince you that we definitely should keep it in, but that's how I
Honest,
get my mind around it.
I'm still trying to get my mind around what exactly would like. So, I guess I'm wondering when it's doing the correction.
Hmm.
I can understand this bad, right? The the single quote with something that has no string interpolation inside it at all. It's just a straight text string. You get rid of the quotes, no harm, no foul. Everything is great. I'm struggling with this example here. Is this a thing that this is considered to be a good example to have the string interpolation in it but not evaluated? And if I'm understanding right what you're saying, the plus side of that would be if you decide to put string interpolation in there, it's going to blow up probably noisily because whatever hopefully you're testing for the interpolated result in your string,
Hmm.
it's not going to show up. It's going to show up as 1 plus 1 or whatever.
Yeah, something like that. I think it's like this is a weird case. Like, what is this case? Like, when would you write this code?
Exactly.
Code generating a string that looks like Ruby interpolation. So maybe it's something meta. Like it's like you're generating Ruby code, you're generating Ruby docs, something like that is happening. So yeah, it's not that it is common, but it's like it's. I mean, we wouldn't. I don't think we would have. Well, I don't know. Maybe there's examples of this, but I don't think we'd have example of standard where it's like, or Rubycop rules where it's like you can't use this language. Maybe there's some unsafe language features, but it's like someone has added this into here docs because for somebody out there somewhere they did have a need to do this. They did have a need to output strings like this, or just like treat the string as a string. It's just a string. Like please don't do anything with it. If there's a need for single quoted strings sometimes without interpolation, there's a need for single quoted here docs at times. Apparently, theoretically. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
I mean, I agree, and this is one of those things, like, I feel like we are 100% in the realm of we are bike shedding so you don't have to, because
Yeah.
I find that here doc strings in the first place are not exactly the most common things to see in code.
Yeah.
The case where this is gonna happen seems pretty small. It's safe. It supports autocorrect. Do you want a third opinion? Because I talked with Justin Searles about this earlier. If you want to hear his opinion on that,
Let's do it.
that was that it's weird and we should put it in as long as it doesn't fail, which, judging based on the documentation, it should be pretty safe to put in. So we might as well put it in. I wonder if this is ever going to trip anybody up.
Will this code ever be executed? Actually,
It's kind of that's where I'm landing on this too. So
Let's do it. I don't feel like we'll. I feel like we won't regret it. I feel like we might never think about it again.
Nope.
Is what it comes down to.
absolutely, that I'm pretty sure is what's going to happen. In PHP they have here doc and now doc. So there it is.
Time continuum covered there.
Yeah, and actually the difference between the two of them is kind of what's happening here, whether or not there's interpolation or not. So let's go into the that's it.
We shipping?
We're shipping. That's all the rules.
I'm gonna click Dependabot as soon as you do this. I'm gonna get my updates running locally.
Assuming that the test pass. So that'll be the next little bit. So maybe shipping on stream is not actually feasible. Usually this is pretty fast, but if the tests fail, we will ship later when I can dig into the tests. But yeah, you can see what we are actually testing for is 2.6 and above, which is actually a little bit more than Ruby support, because 2.6 is past end of life, right? And
Sounds right.
I think 2.7. I'd have to look it up for that one.
Yeah, I feel like I heard very soon that that's going end of life.
Oh well, there you go. Okay. Well, I will get back to that. And we're just going to chit-chat a little bit.
There you go.
Because when it comes to actually fixing up, yeah, we're coming up close to the hour. It's a little too late to. And yeah, these issues are inside. There's like a nil class that's coming up, so I'm gonna have to follow up on that later. But yeah, there you go. So I don't know. I don't remember if I had any real concluding words. Oh yeah, it was mostly we were gonna ship it, and we were gonna chit chat a little bit about Pi Day. So today is March 14th, and I like to add on a little emoji to the end of the commit message, so that then we can. Usually, I just pick if it's somebody's Independence Day, I'll use their flag, something like that.
Yeah.
But since it's Pi Day, I asked you what Pi, or what emoji you wanted to use, and you chose one. So if you wanted to share with everybody.
Oh yeah, it's the cherry emoji for cherry pie. So I like a lot of desserts, a lot. But as I thought about it over the years, his favorite dessert was like the most common get to know you question I ran across, and it's like I think it's cherry pie. Like, love it so much. There's a sad twist to the story though, because I had to go gluten free a few years ago. And so it's a lot harder to get a cherry pie now. It's not just 50 cents at the nearest grocery store for the tiny ones. Yeah, and I'm too lazy to bake, and so I don't bake pies at all.
There you go.
So that, maybe every couple of years is when it might happen that I might get a cherry pie. But it is worth it when it does, when I do get it, because I just love it. Yeah, one of those growing up things, like that was something we had a lot. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. Blueberry pie as well, and then I was like, I've never heard of anyone else eat a blueberry pie. Did our family make this up? So have you ever heard of blueberry pie?
I was about to say I've never had a blueberry pie in my whole life.
Yeah, yeah, maybe an Atlanta, Georgia area thing. I'm not sure. But
There's
yeah,
a good baked good tradition in the whole of Georgia area that I know every time I've gone into like Savannah or Atlanta, it's a good place to have dessert.
yeah. Now, Pecan pie.
Oh,
How do
pecan
you
pie.
pronounce that word?
I'd say pecan pie, but I've heard of this debate before, and honestly, I don't know if I have. I certainly don't have a strong opinion on it because I've seen
Yeah.
pecan, I've said pecan. It just doesn't.
I literally don't know how I say that word, and I think because we never ate it much, and
Right.
then I was like hearing the different pronunciations, and it was one of those things where I was like, oh, it's the opposite of what I would assume. Like people in the South pronounce it one way, people elsewhere pronounce it another way, and it's the opposite of what would assume. But
Hmm.
whenever I try to remember something as, oh, this is different than what I would think,
Right.
then my brain gets confused because then I remember the actual way, but then that reversal runs in an infinite loop. So now I don't know. I heard a pecan even as a third
Pecan.
pronunciation. Yeah, pecan pie. So yeah, they're good too. I just don't know how to pronounce it. So maybe that could be the next release.
Yeah. Well, I will certainly put the cherries in the commit message after I run down that error. And cool. Thank you for joining me on this. And next one, I guess, will be in a couple weeks when April rolls around. And yeah, awesome. It was a lot of fun. Thank you,
Thanks
Josh.
for having me on. It was fun to think through it together. Hopefully that was helpful rationale for folks as they think about their own software as well. They don't have to think about these Rubicop rules because they're using standard.
Exactly.
But these kind of ways for evaluating software totally apply for any decisions you have to make.
Cool, cool. All right. Bye bye.